22 times more likely to develop lung cancer than men who don't. And of course, that's obvious. Or not, maybe it's not obvious to you. I've been, like I said, I told you before, I've been reading obituaries since I was a kid, trying to figure out how long I was going to live. This is an issue that I was trying to deal with, back in the 1950s, a lot of people smoked. It's like over half the population was smoking. So we saw a lot of people dying in their 50s from lung cancer. And in the old days, they used to tell you what people died from. They don't do that anymore. But in those days, they said that they died of lung cancer, they died of emphysema, they died of natural causes, whatever. But I saw a lot of individuals that died of lung cancer in their 50s. And I thought, well, this isn't very good. And at that point, of course, I convinced myself that smoking was probably not a very good idea. Even though on television, Ricky and Lucy, if you watch the I Love Lucy show, at the beginning of the show, they would come on the stage and both of them would be smoking Chesterfields and saying, "This is that's the smoothest cigarette I've ever tasted," that kind of thing. So, and there were a lot of people smoking cigarettes on television, and despite the fact that all of my heroes were cigarette smokers, I decided that I wouldn't smoke because I wanted to live longer than 50 years or whatever. Women who smoke are 12 times more likely to develop lung cancer than women who don't. So it's more, men are more susceptible, or maybe they're not. Women actually have smaller lungs. So why are men dying at a higher rate than women are? Because men smoke more. They think it makes them look sexy, makes them look tough. And of course, we all want to look tough. 85% of men and 75% of women with lung cancer smoke. Equality, of course, women are catching us. Congratulations. This is equality. This is women's liberation. Women are smoking more now than they ever were before. Women comprised only 26% of lung cancer deaths in 1979. In 2002, it increased to 42.8%. So congratulations, you just about caught us. And of course, women are catching men, and it's always good to find out that women are catching men. About 15% of mothers smoke during pregnancy. This is probably not the smartest thing that you can do. Remember that tobacco is a vasoconstrictor. So when women are smoking cigarettes, what they're doing is they're starving their fetus for blood. And for that reason, there's a lot of side effects. One of them is that they're and not only that, but if we're talking about hemoglobin has an affinity for oxygen. But it has a stronger affinity, a 269 time greater affinity for carbon monoxide. Carbon dioxide is O2. Carbon monoxide is CO. So it only has one oxygen molecule. And because it only has one oxygen molecule, it's more likely to attach itself to that hemoglobin. And if it does that, that hemoglobin can never carry oxygen again. And that's why when you are in a room with carbon monoxide and you get too much carbon monoxide, you die because you can't get oxygen, despite the fact that there's lots of oxygen floating around. If you're breathing carbon monoxide, it's not like the carbon monoxide replaces all the oxygen in the room. That's not the way it works. What happens is there is enough carbon monoxide, and since the blood has a greater affinity for that hemoglobin, the carbon monoxide will attach itself to the hemoglobin more readily than oxygen does. So despite the fact that there's enough oxygen in the room to be okay, it's the carbon monoxide, of course, that has a greater affinity, and therefore you die. And like I said last time, it's kind of funny, and that's not that funny, but it's interesting when you see somebody that has died of carbon monoxide poisoning, because usually they turn gray, people turn blue. But these individuals are bright cherry red because they've got all this carbon monoxide in their system. It's really kind of interesting. So you get somebody in the morgue, and you've got all these bodies, and everybody's blue and everybody's gray, and then you've got one that's pink. And you're going, wait a minute, is that person still alive? Of course they're not still alive. Nicotine makes platelets more sticky, increasing the possibility of clot forming. And for this reason, these individuals are more susceptible to stroke. They're more susceptible to cardiopulmonary disease, having a blood clot someplace in their bodies. Babies born to smokers have a lower birth weight. They have a higher incidence of SIDS. Remember, it's a vasoconstrictor, so you're not allowing enough oxygen to get to that baby. So the baby is not growing as fast as other babies. They have a higher incidence of SIDS. SIDS has to do with carbon dioxide. Because the child isn't as mature as they would be if the mother wasn't a smoker, there is a mechanism in your brain that tells you that you're breathing too much carbon dioxide. In which case you move. You'll move. If you're asleep and you're sleeping with your face in the pillow, you will start breathing too much carbon dioxide, and you will automatically move. You'll just adjust yourself, even though you're asleep. Well, babies can do the same thing. But a baby of a mother who has smoked, that area of the brain isn't mature enough. So when they start breathing too much carbon dioxide, the baby doesn't move, and the baby chokes itself to death. And that's what SIDS is. It's really kind of a tragedy if you think about it. Something that makes me irritated, because they don't have to smoke during pregnancy.
What about wood stoves?
I'm sorry?
Wood stoves. Wood stoves in the house. Would that be similar to regular oxygen in the air? I'm sorry, wood stoves.
Oh, wood stoves.
Wood stoves.
I'm not exactly sure. I don't think so. No, because it's vented. The problem with what we used to see, I was living in Lubbock, Texas, and we would get a lot of Mexican farm workers that would come up from Mexico, and they would live in shacks or whatever. And these people would heat their homes with hibachis, which produces heat, but there's no venting, so the smoke would get into the room, and the carbon monoxide would get into the room, and then you'd have a whole room full of dead people, including children. Of course, their lungs are smaller, so they die first. The adults die later. As long as it's vented, you should be okay. If you've got a leaky wood stove, then potentially you might have a problem. Potentially, and you can tell. Because you start getting a headache when the carbon monoxide, because your brain's being starved for oxygen. Not only that, but your cheeks turn real cute and red. It's really cute. So, yes and no. Yes and no. As long as it's properly vented, you're okay. Not only that, but smoke rises and heat rises. It rises with the heat. So it's mostly up along the ceiling. It all depends on how close the room is, how many people are in the room. All of these things are factors. Women who smoke during pregnancy are twice as likely to miscarry and have spontaneous abortions as non-smokers, and of course that has to do with the vasoconstriction. Children whose mothers smoke during pregnancy have a 4 times greater chance of having ADHD. Really? ADHD? Come on. They also have a greater chance of having conduct disorder, drug dependence, asthma, chronic bronchitis, and chronic respiratory symptoms. So the mother is depleting the brain. The brain isn't being fed by enough oxygen. And for that reason, we have all of these interesting problems that crop up later. Smokeless tobacco can be addicting as smoking because tobacco in smokeless tobacco forms contains more nicotine than smoked tobacco. People use more smokeless tobacco when they use. Smokeless tobacco has a higher pH, allowing it to pass into the capillaries more readily. One dip of smokeless tobacco delivers the same amount of nicotine as 3 to 4 cigarettes. So if you put that dip between your cheek and gum, one of the things you're doing is smoking like 4 cigarettes. Eventually, of course, you're going to spit most of the nicotine, you're going to spit a lot of the cars of nicotine out. You're less likely to develop lung cancer, but you're more likely to develop all kinds of interesting gum cancers, or mouth cancers, or throat cancers. oral cancers, pharyngeal cancer, esophageal cancer, cheek cancer, and gum cancer. I told you the story of my neighbor who was chewed tobacco and got cancer in his salivary glands and had to have his salivary glands removed and all the muscles on the right side of his face. And they had to fuse his vertebrae together. Benefits of quitting using tobacco: 20 minutes after quitting, your blood pressure and pulse rate drop, and the feet and the hands warm to normal temperatures. Within 3 hours, the carbon monoxide level in the blood drops, and oxygen levels increase. Both of them will increase to normal. When I was in the service, one of the jobs that I had was drawing blood and determining if somebody was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. Well, it was easy to find blood that didn't have any carbon monoxide. All you had to do was find a non-smoker. So I was the normal control. I had a friend that was a chain smoker, and he was the positive control. So we would draw his blood, and it's really kind of cool. You draw it in a tube with sodium citrate in it, and it's an anticoagulant, and then you take it and you shake it, and if it turns cherry red, then it means there's carbon monoxide in it. And that's what we would do. With my blood, of course, you shake it, nothing. It's as purple as it should be. But with his blood, this guy's just a smoker. And here he is, he's got so much carbon monoxide in his blood that we could use him as our positive control. As not funny as that is, it wasn't funny at all. Anyway, so then we would check it, this positive control, this negative control, we would check it against the patient's blood. And all you had to do was shake it and create bubbles. Kind of interesting. Carbon monoxide. Within 24 hours, the risk of sudden heart attack decreases. And as I told you, I had a friend that died 3 weeks ago. It's 3 weeks now. Within 48 hours, the nerve endings adjust to the absence of nicotine while the sense of taste and smell return. And for this reason, some people will use tobacco as a diet control. Because they aren't as hungry, and things don't taste as good. Everything tastes like an old cigarette to them, so they don't eat nearly as much food. Once you go off of tobacco, of course, all of your taste buds come back, and the person gains like 5 or 10 pounds, and that irritates a lot of people. A lot of models are smokers, and the reason they're smokers is to stay skinny. It's really kind of odd. What's the lady's name? Ireland. What was her first name? I can't think of her name. She was a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. Kathy Ireland was a chain smoker, and that's how she stayed slim. As soon as she stopped smoking, as soon as she stopped modeling and stopped smoking, big bone lady. She kind of got paunchy. Within 1 week, breathing improves and constricted blood vessels begin to relax. Within 2 to 12 weeks, circulation improves, lung function increases up to 30%, and the complexion begins looking healthy again. If this were a better picture, I apologize for that. But smokers actually will be starving their skin for oxygen. And for that reason, it turns leathery. It's kind of gray. Their faces are kind of gray, which is always an attractive color. But once they stop smoking, then the circulation in their skin becomes better and better and better, and they start looking better. Within 1 to 9 months, fatigue, coughing, sinus congestion, and shortness of breath decreases, and the lungs increase their ability to handle mucus. One of the things, if you've ever been around a smoker, they wake up first thing in the morning and they cough up just a gallon of Flint water. They cough up phlegm, and it's discolored. Why is it discolored? Because they have taken in all those cars of nicotine. It's black. It's gray. This grayish, nasty color, and it stinks. Oh my God! So if you're ever around a smoker, the first thing in the morning, they'll get up and they'll start coughing, and they'll cough up this mucus. If you've ever been around any smokers, it's kind of nauseating. Within 1 year, the risk of coronary heart disease has been cut in half. Within 5 years, the heart disease rate has become that of a non-smoker. Within 10 years, the lung cancer rate drops to just above that of a non-smoker. Within 10 to 15 years, the disease rate has returned to that of a non-smoker. It takes 10 to 15 years to recover from smoking. So if you quit tomorrow, it's going to take you 10 to 15 years to get back to normal. I apologize for that. It's not my fault. I wish it was some other way. I tried to talk my friend that just died of a heart attack into not smoking. And he would call me from time to time. He'd just gone to see his doctor, and he would ask me, how can I do this without stopping smoking? And I'd say, there's no way in hell. And we'd get into this really interesting argument. And then he would say, well, you're going to die before me. And I would say, no, I'm going to be dancing on your grave, you son of a bitch. I know that kind of thing. He was an old Air Force friend. We loved each other, but at the same time, I knew that if he didn't stop smoking, it was going to kill him. And the reason that I didn't die from my heart attack, and the reason he died from his heart attack, was because he was a smoker. We had exactly the same heart attacks. And I had no damage whatsoever. My heart is as healthy as it was before I had the heart attack. And all of his organs shut down. He had interaction taking place with all of his organs. So despite the fact that he had a heart attack and they were able to open up his arteries, he's got his kidneys are involved, his liver's involved, and his kidneys never did start functioning again. That's what they were waiting for. They were waiting for his kidneys to kick in again. They put him in a coma so that his kidneys wouldn't have to work so hard. But his kidneys never came back. And it's because he was a smoker. Dumb shit. I said that right in front of the camera. Oh, we used to make fun of each other all the time. But I was right. And now I feel great about it. Since I would rather be alive than dead. I'm sorry that he's dead. I wish he was still alive. But if he'd stopped smoking when I told him to, he might still be alive today. All right. He didn't use opioids, so I don't have anything to talk about my friend anymore. I can show you a picture of him. I got a picture. Oh, it's on the other computer. It's on the other computer. Anyway, it's ugly. It's just ugly. He's got a brother that looks just like you, which is kind of tragic if you think about it, because he's not a very handsome guy. He thought he was beautiful. He thought he could seduce anybody. He was just a pain in the ass, including my wife. I know. This guy's after my wife. He's after my daughter. What's going on? And he was a friend of mine. Bastard. Anyway, depressants. Depressants depress the activity in the central nervous system. That's why they're called depressants. There are several different types. These depressants sedate. They relax your muscles. They may depress your inhibitions. They may change your emotions, or they may change the impulses. They mimic the natural inhibitory neurotransmitters. We talk about these all the time: endorphins, enkephalins, dynorphins, and gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA. So that's what they do. They mimic the inhibitory neurotransmitters. And that's why they sedate, because they're mimicking these natural depressant neurotransmitters. There are three major classes of downers: opiates and opioids, sedative hypnotics like sleeping pills, or benzodiazepines, and alcohol is the other major depressant. There are four minor classes of depressants: skeletal muscle relaxants like Librium, antihistamines, that's the stuff that you're taking, you're taking antihistamine that you're taking when you have an allergic reaction or you catch a cold. The antihistamines will stop the inflammatory process. That's the whole purpose of the antihistamines. Over-the-counter depressants and look-alike depressants, but we don't have look-alike depressants in the United States. Opiates, opioids, there's a ton of them. Opium, morphine, codeine, hydrocodone, which is also known as Vicodin, oxycodone, which is also known as OxyContin, methadone, and of course heroin are all of the opiates and opioids. Opiates, of course, are natural from the opium poppy, and opioids are synthetic. Okay. Originally developed as painkillers, cough suppressants, and diarrhea treatments, the opiates and opioids are now just used for, not so much for cough suppressants, but they really do work as cough suppressants. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. If you've got mucus in your lungs, don't you need to get it out? Don't we need an expector to get that stuff out of your lungs? Of course we do. But it will suppress the lungs. So if you've got somebody that's they can't stop coughing, then they will take an opiate or an opioid, whichever the case may be. This isn't all of the opiates and opioids. We've got Demerol. There's just a ton of these guys out there, and that's part of the problem. There's too many of them out there. Fentanyl, of course, is a synthetic. It's an opioid. Sedative, hypnotic, synthetic chemicals developed to treat anxiety and insomnia. Middletown, it was very popular back in the 1950s. Phenobarbital was popular back in the 1940s. Seconal, Doradin were popular in the 50s. Quaaludes, Rohypnol. You may have heard of Rohypnol before. It's a sedative hypnotic. This is actually a date rape drug. Really, the reason that they use it as a date rape drug is because you can knock somebody out, they are still sexually responsive, and they don't remember anything afterwards. Morphine does the same thing. The reason that morphine is such a good painkiller is not because it's such a good painkiller, but you don't remember the pain. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make you forget the pain. It does take the pain away to some extent, depending on how much you take, but it makes you forget. And that's one of the reasons. Rohypnol is the same way. It makes you forget. And so this woman that you met at the bar, you got her drunk, you dropped some Rohypnol in her drink, you have your way with her. The next morning you take her someplace. You won't leave her in your apartment, but she knows what happened. You take her someplace and you drop her off. She doesn't remember what happened the night before. She was relatively sexually responsive, but at the same time, she can't remember anything. And she's not exactly sure what happened or who you were. She can't remember that. And that's why Rohypnol is used as a date rape drug. GHB is the same way. It's also used as a date rape drug. Benzodiazepines, examples of benzodiazepines, of course, are Valium, which is diazepam, and Xanax, which is olazepam. Alcohol is a natural byproduct of the fermentation process of plant sugars or starches. This is the oldest psychoactive substance used by humans, alcohol. You find a rotten orange or a rotten apple, if you bite into it, the fermentation process has taken place, you get a blast of alcohol. Yeah. So if you peel an orange and the orange is partially rotten, one of the things that will happen is that you'll get a shot of alcohol. And I don't like that flavor. I don't like it. I would rather eat, I like an orange. I mean, it tastes nice and sweet, right? That's why we eat oranges or tangerines. But you're right, bite into a rotten part of the orange, that tastes bad. I was going to say shit, but I didn't say that. I wanted to say that. It tastes really bad. So when my wife drinks wine, which she does, my wife drinks wine, it tastes like rotten grapes to me. I haven't had a drink since 1976. It tastes bad to me. It tastes rotten to me. It is rotten. That's what the whole process is. It's rotten fruit. That's how you get alcohol. Yeah. Kind of nasty. Rotten bananas. I don't know. Bananas fruit? Can you make nasty stuff out of bananas? I've never known. Is there a banana wine? I don't think so either. My mother used to eat brown bananas. You know, after they get really mushy. Alcohol is the world's second most destructive drug in the world. Of course, number one is tobacco. So here we have, let's pretend that there's nobody in the Americas, okay? There's nobody, wait a minute. You guys are here. You guys are in the Americas. And you've got tomatoes and potatoes and corn and tobacco, okay? So you guys are here. So the Europeans decide, oh, wait a minute, there's nobody there. Let's go over there. Of course, they run into a lot of people. And sometimes they get into trouble. But what do they bring over with? Alcohol. So what's the number one scourge on the reservation right now? Alcohol. So it must be the Europeans' fault. However, what's the number one killer in the world? Tobacco. Payback is a bitch. Oh, I said that. So, the question is, have more natives died of alcohol consumption or more Europeans died of tobacco consumption? I don't know, we're just I'm trying to start trouble here. I just want to make you feel better about everything. There's no way to feel better. Anyway, tobacco is the most destructive substance. And you guys gave it to us, and so it must be your fault. But you also gave us potatoes, and I appreciate that. I like potatoes. Tomatoes, I eat tomatoes, okay. I'm not a corn eater, but some people like corn. You guys gave us that stuff. We gave you wheat, we brought the cows over. The pigs, we brought pigs over. Skeletal muscle relaxants, synthetically developed central nervous system depressants that target the area of the brain responsible for muscle coordination and activity. Skeletal muscle relaxants, Paraffin Forte, you may have heard of some of these, Soma, Paraffin Forte, Flexeril, Lioresal. This stuff I've never used before, but Robaxin I've seen before. Anyway, these are all muscle relaxants. So if you've got a muscle that's too tight, you can take Librium, or you can take Paraffin Forte or Flexeril or something. And they are muscle relaxants. Antihistamines, of course, are found in cold and allergy medications to block the neurotransmitter histamine. They're synthetic drugs used to treat allergic reactions, to prevent ulcers. I take a pill every morning for my stomach acids, and it is an antihistamine. It prevents shock, it prevents rashes, it prevents motion sickness, it prevents symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So antihistamines, we use them all the time. Normally they're not, they don't do anything. They don't do anything except stop the allergic reaction. They stop the inflammation process. That's all they do. So you're not going to take an antihistamine and get buzzed. However, we can use ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, and we can make crystal meth out of it, or methamphetamines out of it. As fascinating as that is. Over-the-counter depressants are sleep aids or sedatives. Nitol, of course, is one of them. Sleepy, Sominex, Lunesta is another one. They're all Z drugs. These are all Z drugs, and they cause you to fall asleep. They have the active ingredients in there are kind of scary. Scopolamine, of course, antihistamines, bromide derivatives, and alcohol. The scary thing is the scopolamine, because if you get too much scopolamine, it will arrest your central nervous system. So it slows everything down. Scopolamine is also known as the truth serum. Of course, that's Veritas serum if you watch Harry Potter. Which I did last weekend. I watched all the Harry Potter movies last weekend. But it's the truth serum. So if I'm questioning you and trying to get you to give me the combination to your safe or whatever, you can't help yourself but give me that information. It's scopolamine is the truth serum. Anyway, that is kind of scary if you think about it, isn't it? Just a little bit? Yeah, scopolamine. We're putting truth serum into our bodies just to go to sleep. I don't know if that's good or bad. Lookalike depressants, of course, we rarely see them today. They're in the old days, and actually there weren't very many of them, and we didn't use them very much. Opiates and opioids are the products of the opium poppy. Opioids are synthetic versions of the opiates. Opiates come from the milky sap that oozes from the unripe seed pod of the flower. This is what it looks like when it's oozing out. And we, of course, take a knife and we scrape all that and we put it into a container, and then we synthesize it. If we have an opium poppy, we can milk it for about a week. It will milk for about a week. It can be milked about 6 times a year. So in Afghanistan or the places where they are actually creating opium, they get a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of opium that they can get out of these seed pods. Opium produces over 25 alkaloids. The two most important are codeine and morphine. Codeine makes up 0.7% to 2.5% of the opium exudate. Morphine makes up about 10 to 20% of the opium exudate. The third alkaloid that is a stimulant rather than a depressant is thebaine, but of course this stuff is not very strong, so we really don't use it. What we're using is this much of it. Potentially 22.5% is the most we can get out of a seed pod. That means that we can use 22.5% of it, so that means that we're not using 77.5% of it. Most of it we're just throwing away, because there's nothing in there. There's thebaine in there, but the thebaine is not very strong, so we're not going to use it. So we get codeine and morphine. So now we have to synthesize these two chemicals out of this mass of stuff, and we're only going to get about 22.5% at the max. Potentially it's 10.7%. So 90% of it we can't really use. We have to throw it away. Semi-synthetic opiates are opiates that are refined in a select way to produce a psychoactive substance that is partially natural and partially synthetic. And that's the way heroin is. It has to be, we have to start out with the drug, but then we synthesize it. We mix it with something else. We mix it with chemicals and we create heroin. Hydrocodone, of course, is also a semi-synthetic opiate. That's Vicodin. Oxycodone, in the old days we used to call it Percodan. Now we call it OxyContin. It's much stronger as OxyContin than it was as Percodan. And Dilaudid, of course, is also a semi-synthetic opiate. So we have 4 semi-synthetic opiates: heroin, Vicodin, Percodan, and Dilaudid are the semi-synthetic opiates. Fully synthetic opiate drugs are things like methadone, Demerol, and Darvon. If you have a headache that won't go away, potentially you can go into the emergency room and they'll give you an aspirin with Darvon. They'll put this synthetic opiate in there, and the Darvon will knock out your headache. If you were pregnant, you were giving birth to a child, and they decided that they needed to reduce the amount of pain that you were in, potentially they'd give you a spinal block, and they would use Demerol. They'd shoot you up with Demerol. When I had my kidney stones the first time, in order for me to pass the stone, they had to knock me out, and they knocked me out with Demerol. Demerol is really strong stuff. It's pretty good stuff. It's nothing that you want to stay awake. You shouldn't try to stay awake on this stuff. Be careful. Synthetic opioid antagonists, naltrexone and naloxone. This is the stuff that we have in the shots. The Narcan has naloxone or naltrexone. And that will block the opium. The problem is that when you overdose on opium, on heroin, or whatever you're taking, OxyContin, the problem is that your respiratory center is being arrested. It's slowing it down to the point of stopping it. Well, if you can't breathe, you can't live. So what we will do is we'll give you a shot of Narcan. What does Narcan have in it? It has an opioid antagonist in it, and it will stop the opioid process. So it stops the arresting of your central nervous system. So your heart will beat again, and you'll be able to breathe. If we can give you this stuff, the naloxone or the naltrexone. Opium poppies were first cultivated in ancient Mesopotamia. It then spread north to Greece and west to Egypt, eventually making its way east into Asia. Opium was used in many medicines in the Old World, but its ills were seen even then when various writers wrote of its addictive properties. Opium tended to be used as an additive, eaten or chewed, or mixed with liquids and drunk. So that's how we used to take it in once upon a long time ago. So opiates come out of Mesopotamia. That's you know, right there between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. In the early 1600s, opium regained popularity when the Swiss chemist Paracelsus began making a tincture mixed with alcohol with opium powder, and this he referred to as laudanum. So what are we mixing our opium with? Well, let's mix it in alcohol. What else can we put in there anyway? Water? Sure, we could use water, but it doesn't work as well. So let's make this stuff called laudanum, and we can treat all kinds of interesting things with it. You've got diarrhea, it just shuts you down right away, locks you right up. That's perfect. It helps your pain relief. If you have diarrhea, of course, that's the same thing as dysentery, or it's a different structure. Or if you're coughing too much, starting to injure yourself by coughing, we can give you laudanum. Opium continued to be used in medicinal mixtures for the next 3 centuries. Paregoric is tincture of opium with camphor, so it has an interesting flavor. Camphor, that's the stuff that smells like, I don't know, it smells like Vicks Vapor Rub is what it smells like. So let's mix it with this really smelly stuff. It was developed for the treatment of diarrhea. Once upon a time, my mother was suffering from gallbladder disease. She had a gangrenous gallbladder, and she was in a world of hurt. It was painful for her, and she had diarrhea. So she called up the doctor and she said, "Hey, you son of a bitch." She's always smart doctors. She said, "I need some Paregoric." Because she had this violent diarrhea. Well, the doctor, of course, did what she said. And she took the Paregoric, and then she was able to go into the doctor. Once she went in there, they found out her gallbladder was a mess. And in those days, they used to do an operation and cut your gut open and pop the gallbladder out. Anyway, they don't do that anymore. Now they punch 3 little holes in there, and they chop it up, and they suck it out through a hose. But in the old days, they used to make a cut. So my mother had a scar right under the rib cage. My poor mother. Anyway, she demanded Paregoric from the doctor, and he actually gave it to her. This mixture is still used today, of course. My mother, as I said. Of course, this was back in the 60s. I don't want you to think it was yesterday afternoon. She's been gone for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. Opium smoking became popular in the 16th century. This means of drug introduction puts more of the active ingredient in the system faster. It takes about 7 to 10 seconds for it to get into your system. Because the psychoactive ingredients enter the bloodstream and brain faster, there's a greater sense of euphoria, well-being, and relaxation. So we can smoke opium and we can get it into our system relatively quickly. Modern methods of smoking heroin involve heating the substance in tin foil and inhaling the fumes through a straw, and this is known as chasing the dragon. In the old days, they would have opium dens, and especially people who were Chinese, they had this real affinity for opium. So they would have these opium dens, and sometimes Westerners would go in there, but usually it was Chinese individuals. When I was up in Montana, there was a town in Montana called Havre, Havre. It's between, it's not between anything. It's just up in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, it's Havre, and Havre burned down at one point. So all the buildings burned down, but they still had the basements. So instead of closing the town down or moving it someplace, people started living out of the basements. And then, of course, eventually they built the buildings back. But for like 5 or 10 years, everybody lived in their basements. So, and they didn't have any streets above ground; they were all underground. So they had connected all of these basements, and you could go down and go shopping. And they had an ice cream shop in there, and they had all kinds of. There was a hospital down there, and so it's a whole city block now. That's all that's left. They tore everything else down, but they still have this city block. People just built on top of it and didn't do anything with the basements. So they decided that they would make this a tourist attraction. So you can go down into the underground, into the Havre underground, and look at the way that they used to live back at the end of the 19th century. Really fascinating stuff, but they have a brothel down there, which is kind of interesting. The beds are like really close together. I don't know about that. Anyway, right next to the brothel is an opium den. It's a Chinese opium den. Now there's a lot of interesting things about opium dens, but here it is, it's an opium den. So the question is, there aren't any Chinese people in Havre today, so what happened to all the Chinese people? Once upon a time, they had enough Chinese people that they had an opium den. And some of the prostitutes were Chinese. I know. So what happened to all the Chinese people? There's no Chinese people left. Did they all just leave? This is an uninteresting place. I think I'll go someplace else. Is that what happened? No. No, that's not what happened. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. At the end of the 19th century, they used to, we passed these, we had this thing called the Yellow Scare. So we were afraid that the Chinese were just going to send masses and masses of people and take over the United States. So we blocked them from coming into the United States. That was in like 1889. We blocked the Chinese from coming into the United States. But we started torturing the ones that were here. We started chasing them away. And so all of these Chinese that had been moving across the country just like everybody else was doing, people started torturing them and killing them. And you can read stories about Chinese people being strapped to ice floes in the river. And they would bet as how long this person would stay alive. Did they murder them? Well, yeah, they did, but who's going to arrest them for murdering somebody that's Chinese? So if you read in the old cowboy, real stories about the cowboys, sometimes these guys they'd shoot them, they'd kill them, they'd just kill them for nothing, because there were no laws that said they couldn't shoot Chinese people. It's horrible, it's a horrible story. I apologize. So the places that these guys went to, they went to places like Wyoming. If they were in Cheyenne, they all died. They were all killed. And the only places they could go to protect themselves were Chinatowns on the West Coast. Yeah, okay, so it has to do with money again. Okay. But that was the only place they could protect themselves. So you don't have like 3 families living in Cheyenne and 4 families living in Great Falls. Doesn't work that way. They killed them all. And nobody did anything about it, as sad as that is. Why am I telling you this horrible story? I know, I keep telling horrible stories. So I know, and it was bad for American Indians as well. But at least there were people that were protecting you. The federal government was trying to do something. They figured they could make money out of it, probably. And they couldn't make any money. They brought the Chinese over to build the railroads. And once the railroads were built, they didn't need them anymore. So what they do with them? They killed them. Or they chased them into Chinatown. As sad as that may seem. Anyway, okay. So we've got these Chinese people in opium dens smoking pipes of opium. If you read Sherlock Holmes had an opium addiction, and he would go into the opium dens from time to time. Wait a minute, I got a picture. This is what Chasing the Dragon looks like. As you can see, she's got opium on her tin foil, and she is heating it to turn it into a gas, and then she's sucking it up through a straw, and that's known as Chasing the Dragon. In 1805, the morphine alkaloid was first isolated from opium and was found to be 10 times stronger than opium and thus a more effective painkiller. Morphine was first used in the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856. Do you guys have any clue where this is, the Crimean War? All Brits know where this is because they were the ones fighting the Crimean War. Crimea is down by the Ukraine in the Black Sea. Okay. It's a peninsula. Just recently, the Russians took it back. They had given it to the Ukrainians, and then they took it back. And of course, that's part of why we're pissed off at the Ukrainians, or at the Russians. because they had given it to the Ukrainians and then they took it back from the Ukrainians. They gave it to them in like the 1950s. And then just recently, Putin decided he wanted it back, so he went in and took it back. And there are a lot of upset people, including Hillary Clinton. And this is one of the reasons why the Russians didn't want Hillary Clinton to be elected president of the United States. They thought that she was an enemy of Russia. And so the information we seem to be getting is that the Russians were backing Trump. Not exclusively, but to the most part, they wanted Trump to win. Doing things like saying that Hillary Clinton and Satan, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, then Satan wins. I know that's so cool. Maybe she really is Satan. I don't know. Maybe Satan really was in favor of Hillary Clinton winning the election. I don't know. I have no idea. Satan and I don't communicate very often, hardly ever. Opium poppies was also used during the American Civil War, of course. This is morphine. Opium poppies were actually grown in the South to provide morphine for the troops. So they were trying to provide synthesize their own morphine. In 1832, the weaker alkaloid codeine was isolated from opium. It was found to only be twice as strong as a painkiller as opium. Codeine was used to treat coughs and general neuralgia. So they were using it for muscle pains or nerve pain. In 1970, I had surgery done. I had my tonsils taken out. And they gave me codeine to take care of the pain. Didn't work. I had to chew aspirin, infused chewing gum, and that made the pain go away. The codeine didn't work at all. Of course, I was pissed because, well, I mean, they gave me all these drugs, and everybody's going, "Oh, the codeine, can I have some? Here, sell me some because it'll make you high, man." And of course, I'm not only am I not getting high, I'm not even, the pain's not even going away. As sad as that is. Anyway, that was codeine, and it didn't work for me, but it works for other people. 1874, a British chemist boiled morphine with acetic anhydride to create an opiate synthetic that was 5 to 8 times stronger than morphine. Bayer Pharmaceuticals of Germany bought the chemical and named it heroin. Its effects were heroic in the individual, and that's the reason they named it heroin. So it came out of from the British, and it was sold to the Germans. German pharmaceuticals have been in the forefront of this movement, taking over the pharmaceutical companies. Bayer Pharmaceuticals, of course, they're the ones that had the aspirin, and they coated it with something to make it more gentle on your stomach, Bayer aspirin. Anyway, that's the Bayer chemical people kind of own pharmaceuticals around the world. Bayer marketed it as a cough suppressant, as a chest painkiller, and as a treatment for tuberculosis and pneumonia. So what do you think? Do you think it worked on tuberculosis? Why would they use it to treat pneumonia? Why would they do that? How could it possibly work? What could it possibly do for you if you had pneumonia? Pneumonia used to be the great level equalizer. Everybody died of pneumonia. If you were going to die, you died of pneumonia. You didn't die of cancer, you died of pneumonia. You didn't die of alcoholism, you died of pneumonia. So how in the world could this possibly treat pneumonia? Would relieve the pain. Pneumonia hurts a lot, so it would relieve your pain. Is that going to keep you from dying of pneumonia? I'm sorry?
Maybe it's just to keep them comfortable.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's make them happy. We'll juice them up and make them happy. It was a cough suppressant. So the reason that they were thinking that these people were dying of pneumonia is because they're coughing themselves through it. So it was a cough suppressant. Did it work? Did it stop the pneumonia? No, but it did stop the coughing. But they still died of pneumonia. It's really kind of tragic. And the pain went away, so you can't beat that. Did it work on tuberculosis? We got the same situation here. It's a cough suppressant. Does it cure tuberculosis? Does it even treat tuberculosis? Tuberculosis is caused by a bacteria. Mycobacterium tuberculi is the bacteria. Bacteria. Does it cure tuberculosis? No, but it made them stop coughing, and it took the pain away. So yeah, you could use it. It didn't do you any good. It didn't cure your tuberculosis, but it made it feel better. Heroin crossed the bloodstream more rapidly than morphine did. The result was a more intense and rapid rush in euphoria. It is estimated that at the turn of the 20th century, there were between 250,000 and 1 million morphine and heroin addicts in the United States, which is a lot of people if you think about it. Through the 1800s, patent medicines were produced that contained opiates. These patent medicines were used for such things as tired blood. The hell is tired blood? What is that? It gave you energy. That was the idea. You could give it to colicky babies. That's a baby that won't stop coughing, won't stop crying, won't stop vomiting. Colicky babies. To treat coughs, of course, and it actually worked on coughs. Diarrhea, worked on diarrhea, and it took your pain away from toothaches. You can't beat all of those. They were used to quiet loud children and to aid in sleeping. So we used to juice up our kids to make them shut up. What an idea. I had a friend that would do that with his kid. He would blow marijuana smoke into the kid's face. The kid's as dumb as dirt now. I mean, it's really kind of tragic. Because he changed its brain structure with all this marijuana smoke. It's secondhand smoke, but it's still marijuana smoke. And he would blow it in the kid's face. And the kid's got ADHD now. Oh, he's a mess. He's just a mess. They were used to quiet. Okay. Surprisingly, surveys showed that more than half of the opium addicts were women, about 56 to 71%. Why women? Because they were the ones that were buying the patented medicines. These guys would come to the door and they would offer them all of these things, brushes and whatnot. They'd also offer them something to make them feel better. And women, of course, were buying this stuff. And of course, that's one of the reasons why they became addicted to heroin. Famous opiate addicts of the 19th century, Jane Addams. If you remember Jane Addams, she's the mother of social work. She started the Hull House in Chicago. She was very serious about drinking her patented medicine. Sarah Bernhardt was an actress. She had neuralgia, so she would drink her patented medicine and it would make her feel better. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the famous poet. Charlotte Bronte, and she wrote one of them, Wuthering Heights or the other. The Brontes, I know it sounds French, but they were English women. Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre is the other. There were two Bronte sisters. And each of them wrote a very famous book. I can't remember which one's which. Charlotte or Emily Bronte is the other one. Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Louisa May Alcott. You may remember this lady. She's the one that wrote Little Women and Little Men. Anyway, Louisa May Alcott. She was an opiate addict. Samuel Coleridge, another poet. Geez, all these writers. What the hell's going on? Samuel Coleridge. Kubla Khan. What is that? Anyway. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. He wrote Rime of the Ancient Mariner. He wrote Kubla Khan. Wait a minute. How many of these people are writers? Jane Addams was a sociologist. Sarah Bernhardt was an actress. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a poet. So if you want to be a poet, evidently you got to get hooked on opium. Charlotte Bronte was a novelist. Louisa May Alcott was a novelist. Samuel Coleridge was a poet. Charles Baudelaire was a Frenchman, and he was a writer. He wrote novels and he wrote poems. Lord Byron, of course, was a poet. Jeez. John Keats was a poet. Edgar Allan Poe. We all know Edgar Allan Poe, one of my favorite authors. The Raven. What else did he write? Cask of Amontillado. All of these wonderful stories. Mystery stories, maybe they were all induced by his opium. Algernon Swinburne was another writer. I'm not real sure what he wrote. Opium, morphine, and heroin became the health concern of the United States around the turn of the 20th century. Okay, so we've got a problem with opium. And it's been going on since the 19th century. And now we have turned the page, and now we're in the 20th century. And we know it's a problem. So how long is it going to take us to do something about it? 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed, limiting the manufacture and the use of opiates. So it took 6 more years. This has been going on for decades. And now we suddenly, finally do something about it. We have a heroin addiction problem in the United States. A heroin overdose problem. The addiction is not the problem. The problem is people dying. And lots of people are dying. What state has the worst heroin problem in the United States? You'd think it'd be California, New York, one of those urban places, right? It's not. It's West Virginia. It's West Virginia. Number 2, New Hampshire. There's no towns up there. How in the world are these guys finding all this stuff? It's opiates, or opioids that they're taking. How long is it going to take us to do something about this? We know it's taking place. We did something about the crystal meth, didn't we? Did the federal government do something about crystal meth? No. They didn't do anything about it. It was a billionaire whose son died of using crystal meth. He's the one that started a campaign spending his own money, advertising that crystal meth can't even use at one time. And it's worked. It's slowed everything down. Now we've got this really horrible problem, and of course every time we talk about we need to do something about guns, somebody's screaming more people are dying of heroin addiction than anything else. So we need to do something about that. Well, yes, we do. But what are we going to do? What can you possibly do? Make it harder for doctors to prescribe opiates? 1914, opiates became the first drug considered a narcotic in the Harrison Narcotics Act. So it took 14 more years. They knew this was taking place, but they couldn't do anything about it. That's the problem with democracy. It's slow. It's so slow. By 1924, heroin production was outlawed in the United States. So we can't grow opium in the United States. We get all of our opium from India. And guess who we buy it from? So do the Indians own the opium in India? Who owns the opium in India? The English used to be in charge of India. And they're the ones that started growing it. As stupid as that sounds, and they couldn't market it anywhere, so they fought 2 wars against the Chinese to get the Chinese to open up their ports. But they were growing all this stuff in India. So all these rich Brits that we hear about, a lot of them made their money off of heroin. Or opium, anyway. So guess who owns the opium fields in India now? Same damn Brits. What's wrong with those people? 1950, and only 63 people incarcerated in federal prisons were incarcerated for narcotics violations in 1915. By 1928, 1 out of every 3 people were incarcerated because of narcotics violations, 2,529 people. By 2004, 86.5% of the federally incarcerated prisoners had been convicted of drug offenses. 155,900 prisoners out of 180,328. This is in federal prisons. So we decided that, hey, maybe if we legalize marijuana, maybe we can get some of these people out of prison. But the problem with marijuana at this point is that some states it's legal, right? Colorado, New Mexico voted last year, was it last year? Year before last, to legalize it, and they voted it down. Arizona did too. California legalized it, Oregon legalized it, Washington, where else? Alaska, Washington D.C. Okay. Right. So in some states it's legal, but is it legal to grow marijuana? Well, there's a federal law against growing marijuana. Okay. So now we got a problem. We've got states that say it's legal, but we've got the federal government that says that it's illegal. So under the Obama administration, he decided to allow the states to do what they wanted to do. But this administration has decided that they're going to, potentially they're going to prosecute. They haven't done anything yet. They're pretty much pissed off at the Californians. So it should be interesting to see what happens. They're going to go into California with an army and let the Coloradans grow all the drugs they want. Should be interesting to watch. Anyway, okay, so let's incarcerate all these people. Because of the market for opiates in the United States, criminal organizations sprung up to supply the demand. And of course, all of these are illegal organizations, the Chinese triads, which you guys know nothing about, the mafia, which you've seen on television, the French Connection, that was a connection between North Africa and Marseille, and that's why it's the French Connection. Mexican narcotraficantes, African traffickers, Russian mafia, Colombian cartels, we'll see it, Edison. So we've got all these different organizations bringing bringing opiates into the United States, as curious as that is. Now this is money, and we're Americans. Americans like money for some reason, and sometimes we allow things to happen even though they're illegal just because we can make money off of it. Okay. Money. Write that down. Money is the most important thing in the whole wide world. You already wrote that down. At present, 4.6 million Americans use opioids illicitly every month. Only 136,000 to 800,000 of these individuals are heroin users. 3.5 million people in the United States have tried heroin. The rest are prescription drug users, OxyContin and Vicodin or hydrocodone. As ugly as that is. A new wrinkle that is appearing in Dallas area in their junior high schools and high schools is a substance called cheese. And if you can see this, it looks like Parmesan cheese. It's a mixture of Mexican brown heroin and over-the-counter medications containing antihistamines. The mixture gives the individual a rush. Several deaths have caused a nationwide scare, of course. We have all kinds of interesting things going on. Flakka is out there. Flakka takes away your inhibitions, and people are eating other individuals. It's like PCP. It takes away your inhibitions, and people do things. They just do things because they have an emotional reaction, and so they're just doing stupid stuff. But it makes you, for some reason, it makes them cannibalistic if they take this stuff, the Flakka. Really a fascinating stuff. It is an opioid as well. Worldwide, 5 to 10 million people are regular heroin users. In the United States, we only consume about 3% of the heroin produced. The areas that are affected the most are Europe and Asia. So if you go to Europe for vacation, one of the things you may run into, and actually when I was over there, I was stationed in Germany, we would go to Amsterdam, and you could be walking along the canals, and somebody would come up to you and offer you heroin. You look like an American, don't you want some heroin? As stupid as that sounds. I know, it was crazy. It was interesting.
Well, in that case, I was like, oh, I'm not American.
I'm not American. And it's usually somebody from Africa. It's really kind of confusing. How am I doing? I got 1 minute. 92% of the world's heroin is produced in Afghanistan now. For the longest time, of course, who controlled Afghanistan? The Taliban. This is an illegal organization. ISIS, of course, is getting their heroin out of Afghanistan, and they're marketing it around the world. And that's one of the ways they're financing their terrorism. Most of the world's legal opium comes out of India, of course, and these are the pharmaceutical companies are buying their stuff from India. Of course, they're buying it from the Brits. Most of the heroin coming into the United States comes up from Mexico. Even if it's white heroin, from Afghanistan, it's still coming up through Mexico because we have this route that's taking place. We can get it across the border. So if we build the wall, let's build the wall. If we build the wall, will it stop the heroin from coming in? Is that why we're building the wall? To stop the heroin from coming in? No, we're trying to stop immigrants. We don't really care. Is it going to stop the heroin from coming in? It's coming underground. Half of it's coming underground anyway.
Other ways